Ledger is a writing podcast and a celebration of being with your crowd. I'm your host, Austin Wilson. Welcome to the show. Today's guest is James Spooner. He is the author of the graphic novel The High Desert, out now from HarperCollins. He's also the creator of the documentary Afro-Punk, which is an awesome documentary about what it's like to be a black punk fan, which James wrote also about in The High Desert. It's a graphic novel that's set in the late 80s, starring James himself as a teenager. It's a memoir about when he discovered punk rock, and as the book's synopsis says, he's mixed race and acutely aware of his blackness. James doesn't know where he fits in until he meets Ty, a young black punk who introduces him to the school outsiders, skaters, unhappy young rebels, caught up in the punk groundswell sweeping the country. It's a memorable coming-of-age tale that has the rebellious nature of punk rock driving the pining that all teens seem to universally feel, that the yearning that we all have to discover ourselves and to just go somewhere else. You follow along in the story as James navigates the world and all the shitty things that happen in the world, but also as he discovers the beautiful parts of the world as well. It's a great book that touches on a lot of stuff that means a lot to me. We talk about how the tagline of the book came about. It's Black Punk Nowhere. So we talk about that. Also about how he wrote characters with unique voices based on memory, since it's about him growing up. And also about the challenge of moving past pain when you're writing a memoir about things that happened to you and other people that you knew. And also other things like, did he write a script and when did the narration boxes get added? So we talk about the craft as well. And we also talk about some of the best punk shows he's ever been to and just the magnificent joy of being at a punk show and experiencing it with a crowd. I love The High Desert. Talking to James was a blast, so I'm excited for you guys to hear it. Make sure you go to his website, Spooner's No Fun. That's his last name, Spooner, and then S. There's no apostrophe, but it means Spooner is no fun. But I think he is fun, by the way. SpoonersNoFun.com. Check out all of his work. Make sure you also check out the anthology that he has coming out from Soft Skull Press. He co-edited it with Chris L. Terry. It's called Black Punk Now. It's going to be coming out on Halloween Day of 2023. You can find his book basically everywhere that books are sold. It's been a pretty awesome success, I think, and people seem to really love it along with me. So yeah, make sure you go to his website, check out the book. As always, go to my website, austinrwilson.com. You can follow me on Medium, the website, at Austin R. Wilson. I also publish on Shibboleth there. I'm on Twitter for now. We'll see if that continues to last, but if not, if I'm not there, I'm definitely on Medium and on Discord at Austin R. Wilson. But as for now, here's my chat with James Spooner. First thing I want to talk about is the title, and it's kind of listed as a almost like a tagline, also Black Punk Nowhere.
Yeah,
I wanted to talk about when that came into the writing process, when the title came in, and it's not something I've really gotten a chance to talk to anyone about yet, about naming the thing that they're going to be putting out. And that word nowhere, I thought about it a lot after I read your book, because it's so rooted in two different places, like literal actual places, but obviously has thematic underpinnings to it as well. So I kind of wanted to talk about including nowhere and when you arrived at it for the title, and how it expresses some of the stuff that you're talking about in your book.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. So, the name, The High Desert, that came pretty quickly into the process. But the subtitle, or like the subline, I definitely played around with for a very long time, like well past the time where I had turned it in. I mean, truth be told, it's like marketing, they,
Sure.
My editor was like, we need people to understand that this is a black punk story. So like,
Right.
You have to come up with a subtitle that explains that, So, I came up with all of these like, grandiose, like, trying to be clever, um, titles, and just like the actual title, The High Desert, the credit goes to my partner, my partner Lisa. She was just like, I was just saying, I needed to say that it's black, and I needed to say that it's punk, and it like, and there should probably be something about like, where we live or why it's called the High Desert or whatever. And she just was just like, what about black punk and nowhere, or whatever, something that like 30 seconds later was like, oh, black punk nowhere, here we are, like, but I think it's been you're the first person to ask about the process of getting that to that place, but you're not the first person to ask about that title, because there is something poignant about like stating that we're nowhere,
Right.
And one of the themes of the book is that like everybody wants to get out,
Yeah.
and so being, and I think as a reader, most of the country lives nowhere, or what our working definition of nowhere is, right? So if you don't live in one of the major, metropolitans, then you probably live in a small town, So, and that can definitely feel like you're in the middle of nowhere,
Yeah, and that's a lot of the stuff that I connected with in your book. I saw myself in you, and in situations that you found yourself in, but also just being like, I've got to get out of here.
Mm-hmm.
That yearning to go somewhere else. And it was so interesting for me to find myself in your story, because I'm a white guy and it's not my exact story, but all of the ways that it crossed over with my life and the same situations that I would find myself in that you were in your story, and feeling drawn to the book. I literally left a record store and went to a bookstore, and I had just bought a couple punk albums, and I saw that like that marketing worked because I was like, oh shit, there's a book about punk. Because I was already in that mindset, and finding, I guess the thing I'm so interested in is, I was talking about it with my wife last night because we watched Afro-Punk last night. I found a copy of it and we watched that, and about the ways that these stories connect with everyone and manage to be so singular at the same time, that your story is uniquely yours, but is also a lot of other people's. And, you see other people talking about that in your documentary Afro-Punk as well. When you're writing it, when you're writing this graphic novel, because the cover literally has 3 people looking down on you, and that was something that I kept thinking about, is the ways in which we gatekeep and breaking past the pressure to feel like you have to define yourself while everyone else is defining yourself. Walk me through, as you're writing, where are you thinking about these themes? Are you thinking about them at all? Or are you just like, this, I know I have to hit this story beat because this happened, or I'm utilizing this aspect of my life to tell a certain part of my story that's going to hit on the theme? Is that in your mind at all?
Yeah, I think all of those things are happening at once. I mean, part of memoir is knowing where to start and knowing when to stop, right? Like it's a little bit easier than writing fiction, in that like the plot has already happened, so you're just kind of figuring out how to tell the plot, right? But I don't remember who said it, but without a plot, without an antagonist, is just a bunch of stuff that happened. Did I hear that on your podcast?
I think Daniel Joshua Rubin. I chatted with him, and he was like, "You're just telling it's just shit that happened."
As I was quoting it, I was like, I think I heard that on your podcast. So thank you.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's it's like, and luckily, for the story, not necessarily for my life, like there were a lot of antagonists in that moment,
Yeah.
So getting down that stuff was not a problem. I think the other part of memoir I learned is being an adult and looking and having context for your memories, right? And that's where, pretty quickly when you start reading, well, immediately when you start reading the book, you get that like there's the black boxes are me as an adult talking about things that happened when I was a kid.
Right.
And I think that that's where a certain magic happens, that may lend itself to to the question, answering the question. It's like I'm at the same time writing what happened or showing what happened plot wise, and then I'm also uh, telling what happened in a certain way, as an adult, right?
Yeah. And as I was thinking about memoir specifically, does it feel like you're in a conversation with a version of you that doesn't exist anymore, or that has changed so much that you've become the you now that can write this thing? Do you feel like you are, I mean, I don't want to say like healing wounds or maybe like addressing specific failures in your past, or does it feel that way?
Yeah, I think it does. I think that like um, part of being able to, I couldn't have written this story while I was still in high school, you know,
Yeah.
because it would just be more like a journal. Here's some things that happened. This sucked. Fuck that guy, like that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and so it's through, and I don't even know if I could write it while I was healing from it. You know, I think the success of this particular story is that I have enough distance that I can even have empathy for the Nazis. You know?
Well, that was one thing it's funny you brought up protagonist and antagonist, because that was a question I was going to ask. But also that I wondered if you writing this was almost like an answer to finally being like, I feel like I am enough of myself that I can get this story out of me. Or did this help you like complete that process? Or is that a process that ever reaches a point where you're like, I'm me now? Because I feel like in high school, that's one thing as I'm reading it, I feel like high schoolers, we always, or, young people, even into our mid 20s, we feel like we're going to arrive, that we'll get to a point where we're like, all right, I'm
Mm-hmm.
done. And does that seem like, did you write this from a place where you're like, you did mention distance, but that you got to a point where you're like, the empathy for the Nazis, is that because you finally arrived at least somewhere, not obviously not the final place you're going
Mm-hmm.
to arrive, but past things enough?
Yeah, it's like the process of making Afro-Punk was that was like a healing on the job film, and it had a lot more anger. Um, and this book is, the I'm 13 in the book, but I'm 46 in real life. So I'm like, I've got a lot of time, and I'm able to. So there's the first thing of just like the surface level, like, oh, I'm dealing with extreme racists. I'm dealing with like, not fitting in, and all of those things that are really uh, take precedent when you're in high school. And then there's these other things that I'm currently grappling with like, ego, and dealing with, I don't know, like low self-esteem, and, self-destructive behavior or whatever, right? Like, once I got past one thing, like the self-hate that I had, like, like there's a couple of panels or scenes in the book where I'm like, 13, I'm looking in the mirror, I'm like crunching my lips together, wishing they were thinner. I'm like pulling my hair, or imagining my hair in a different kind of way. Like, yeah, I'm over that stuff. I'm healed from that stuff, So now I've come to accept, like, this is who I am. This is what I look like. I recognize that regardless of any of that, like, I don't question my identity as a Black person or whatever, those things that I was challenged by in my teens and 20s. But then there's a whole nother layer to unpack, and
Yeah.
and some of that I was writing on the job. So, like, when I'm in the book, when I should be there for my friend, but I ghost her, like, I'm able to look at that from the perspective of, like, oh, I have a hard time being vulnerable. And, to this day, I have friends whose parents have passed away or whatever, and I have to force myself to be vulnerable and say, like, hey, you know what? I don't know what to say, but I love you, and I'm here if you want to talk, or if you don't want to talk and you just want to, like, do something to get your mind off of it. Like, that literally happened a couple days ago, and I had to force myself. Like, I probably wrote that message to my friend 3 days too late, or later than I should have, because I still am like, how do I deal with this? So some of it is like, yeah, I'm all good. Other parts of it is still, writing on the job, exploring as I learn it.
Yeah. And there's a special feature on the Afro-Punk DVD that shows you talking about making the film in a place of emotional vulnerability, and that you are, learning to deal with some things. And it's those moments in the book where you show yourself in vulnerable, um I guess, like you show yourself like people are. You mentioned one point that you would stay quiet to fit in, or to avoid an
Mm-hmm.
ass beating, and that's one thing. As I was taking notes, I was like, man, this is just one of the most succinct summations of what it feels like to be an American
Mm-hmm.
teenager sometimes. And you also apologize to your mom, in one of your captions. And were those moments that you struggled to keep in? That's one. I mean, that's a kind of a standard question for memoir writing, but I just am so interested in the process of arriving at a point, especially, hearing you talk about being vulnerable, because to me, the book reads as very vulnerable in a great way. And I would love to know more about the process of writing them, getting to the point where you're like, all right, I have to draw the panel now of me, being a
Mm-hmm.
shithead. Was How did you arrive at the point where, was it through help of an editor, through the help of your partner, or, because that's another thing, writing is not as solitary as we sometimes think it is. Obviously there is a lot of solitary aspects of it, but how did you arrive at the point where you're like, all right, yeah, I'm keeping the scene in, where I'm saying the thing that I wish I'd never
Yeah.
said?
Well, I mean, first of all, right off the top, I always give so much credit to my partner, because she definitely was my first read. Also, like, would challenge me to the point of tears sometimes, making me
Yeah.
really question, is this the best way to say this? Is this I mean, is this the best way to draw this? Like, whatever. So, so always and forever, like, props to her. Um, but, I think, like, there's certain vulnerabilities that I've never had a problem with. Um, and, I think talking about those kind of like mistakes in I mean, when I was in high school, I was writing zines about like dumb shit that I did, you know, and apologizing for things or whatever. You know, I think that part isn't so hard for me. I know that I walked into this story knowing that most of my readers may have a hard time believing the like blatant, flagrant racism that I experienced. Just being like, oh, come on, like really, kids with swastikas on their trapper keepers, like, you know, or really, like your two black kids are friends with a Nazi, like how's that work? You know, like I knew that's not a common experience, even though there's obviously probably a common experience for Nazis to have friends of color, and they have to try to figure that out. But it's not common for everyday people to be like, oh, like I've known many Nazi skinheads in my life. So in order to like prove to my reader that I'm telling the truth, I knew that I would have to divulge things about myself that are not flattering, you know?
Yeah.
And so once you get through like, oh, this kid, like I said, like ghosted his friend when she was in need, or, you know, didn't speak up when, you know, when, he should have, or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
so maybe I'll believe the other stuff.
Yeah. I definitely understand, balancing that way. And it plays into like life doesn't really break down into 3-act structure, you know, like, and the antagonist thing, like you're saying. How did you find the balance of telling a story? Like, did you set out to tell the specific story of, I mean, obviously, you know, it's, you know, you're going to New York and you're finding a much larger community, and you finally feel not that you have a purpose, but like there's just more possibilities. How did you balance? And I definitely want to talk about the literal, like if there was a script or a beat sheet, or like how you broke the story down, of showcasing your life and telling a story, because you have to, like you say, like it shows on the copyright page, like maybe some things have been conflated or all the names have changed. Like, where was the through line where you're like, okay, I'm telling this story, but I can't tell this portion of my life because it would make this seem weird or unbelievable, like you said. How'd you find that balance?
Well, I mean, I come from film storytelling, and which often does like comfortably land in a 3-act structure and is like, you know, tell the whole story in 90 pages kind of script writing. So while I didn't hold myself to 90 pages, I did understand, you know, beginning, middle, and end. And the story that I'm telling is a simple one of like discovering myself through punk rock, right?
Right.
But what makes it complicated is that I'm black and I live in this town where the other punk rockers are racist, and you know, and we don't know, because it's 1989. We don't know we don't have access to all of the things that punk can be. So it's limited to, you know, what somebody's big brother told us about, some you know, movie that we saw. Maybe somebody had nobody even had a copy of Maximum Rock and Roll, you know? So it's really just kind of like taking bits and pieces from like anything that we could get our hands on, right? Which was not much. So I understood that, like, I think when I was writing down, okay, here's all the things that happened in that first, in my first in the book it's 1 year, but in real life it was 2 years. My first 2 years in punk, living in this desert town, here's all the things that happened, right? I just kind of wrote them down. And then in there, I'm like, oh, we didn't know shit about shit, you know? Like we really
right.
were all posers because we didn't know what punk rock was really about. And as a older teen out of that town, I had very strong feelings about what punk rock was really about. So, I started to think, when did I get glimpses of what punk was really about, And it was in movies like Another State of Mind, where they talk about DIY in a very like, this is what DIY is. This is what punk rock is. Hearing the guys from Youth Brigade or Minor Threat talk about their version of punk was like, yes, that, right, for me. Watching Suburbia was more like just exciting visuals, but those kids weren't doing punk in the way that I eventually, as an adult, would, or as an older teen, come to believe punk is. So then, how can I? So then I'm asking myself, as I'm constructing or formulating this, outlining this story, is like, what is my agenda? And my agenda is to tell people what I think punk rock is, and it's not breaking bottles and mohawks, it's DIY, it's politics, So then I'm like, okay, when were my real experiences of learning that? And that was when I started leaving town, and meeting other punks who were, squatting and, doing Food Not Bombs and anarchists and vegan and, like doing zines. So I had to put that. So that's what I put in the story, So it's like, all of that stuff happened. Not all of that stuff happened in that order, but that's kind of like, that's the storytelling part of it, and I would have a hard time believing anybody is like, yes, this is exactly the way it happened. Like,
our memories are sort of famously malleable. We can misremember things pretty easily.
Yeah. And the other thing that's, is interesting for me is that I wasn't connected to any of the kids who I grew up with, like, until I started writing this book. So, with the exception of one of the people that Melody is based on, I kept in touch with. But like, all of the kids, as soon as I left, I never looked back. And I also changed my name when I moved. So nobody could like piece together that to look for James Spooner, if somebody was interested.
Yeah.
So so I just like was not in contact with anybody. So when I started writing the book, I got reacquainted with almost everybody who's in the book. And I'd ask them like, what do you remember? And their memories were either the same memories I had or memories that were irrelevant to me and my story, So it kind of was shocking to be like, oh, memoir really is just your memories, how you remember them, because, maybe a friend could tell me like something about my energy or attitude or whatever, but the only one piece of information that somebody told me that ended up changing a piece of the book was when I got in touch with the Jenny character, who is, a preppy girl who had a crush on me. I remember like I hadn't written much yet. And I was like, how did I break it off with you? Like, I feel, like I don't remember that at all. And she was like, you didn't break it off with me. I broke it off with you because my friends wouldn't let me hang out with you. And I was like, oh, that is actually really, that's so much better. You know, it's so much better for my story.
That's way better.
So, in real life, I had probably 2 or 3 1-week relationships that year, but I didn't include any of them because they were not relevant to the story. But Jenny not being able to, her friends not letting her date me because I'm punk, that was absolutely relevant to the story.
Oh yeah, that's a big plot point. I was friends with a girl in my high school class, and she told me one time about when I broke up with her. I put it in quotation marks because we were in like 3rd grade, so not really a relationship, and apparently I said something to her that hurt her for years, and that was from 3rd grade, and I asked her what it was, and she was like, she couldn't remember verbatim, but it was something about like I had told her I didn't want to be near her or something. And even as a high schooler, I remember thinking like, how could I have ever been that person? And that would have said something like that or done something like that. And it really, really freaked me out that I couldn't conceive of myself as being a thing that I had clearly done something to hurt her, that she held on to it long enough to mention it to me in high school. Was there like, I don't want to say was there pain, but talk to me about the pain of writing this story on multiple levels, whether it's your personal pain or revisiting others. And because writing's hard enough, and then sort of diving into things, whether they're comedic or like the scene where you ask like, what's vegan mean? Which I liked because I wouldn't have known that for a long time either at that age. But talk to me about the process of working through some of the pain that you might have felt, if you felt any.
I think that the hardest parts were writing my mom, and also writing Ty in a way that honored him, because I guess starting with my mom, like I was a jerk, I mean, I was a teenager, I was a jerk. I can dismiss myself as being like, oh, that's how teenagers are, my teenager is a jerk, like, but I don't know if all those wounds have healed, on either of our sides. And she was definitely someone who I wanted her to see that as an adult, I'm empathetic to how disrespectful I was to her. Also, how I really saw her, and maybe give her a glimpse of why we disconnected, the ways I needed support that she wasn't able to meet me at or whatever, and so when the book was done, I kind of took the risk of doing the whole book without really talking to her about it, and then asking her for permission, like after the fact. And I don't know what she would have. I don't know what I would have done if she was like, if she said, no, I don't want to be in this, or I don't want to be represented that way or whatever. I'd be like, well, I don't know what I would have done at that point. But being the forever doting, forever supportive mother that she is, she did give me permission, and did recognize herself in it. And even when some reviewers have used adjectives to describe her that I didn't necessarily like clueless, I, kind of meekly walked or like called my mom and I was like, I don't know if you read that review yet, but, and she read it and she was like, I was clueless. I didn't know any of this stuff was going on, so that, that is, I think that, that's a little healing for both of us. And then with Ty, I think that I walked into the book still having some resentments towards him, because, I recognized that he was a hugely influential person who, was my touchstone to punk rock, and him being Black, like, made everything okay. But I still had resentments, because he was like cooler than me, and he was, some of those were jealousies that I just never even thought of. Like, oh, I'm still jealous of this dude, like from when I was 13, and some of it was resentments about, because the way our friendship ended, and just whatever. And I remember really late drafts of the book kind of like throwing him under the bus a little bit at the end. And again, my partner was just like, you didn't write him into the book so that you could throw him under the bus. Like you need to focus on why he's there in the first place, which is because it's to honor him. Like, he was the person who made it all right for me to be Black and punk, the first person, so I need to respect that. And so I was able, in the last scene that we see of him, it's interesting because I didn't really change much except for my tone, and and giving him some honor instead of like using those same cells to disrespect him, and again, it's like, I think that that's ultimately healing, because now, like, I don't have those resentments. I don't think about him and think about anything negative. I'm just like, yo, that dude, like, he was the Black punk who made it okay for me to be a Black punk.
Yeah, that's and that's a huge deal. It comes through in the book too. You see him and your guys' connection, and it does. I really like to think of you honoring him, and then also you earlier mentioned having empathy for all of the characters.
Even the Nazi, like, I was like, when I think about what, so the I guess the behind the scenes, like, I'm never like shy to talk about like what's real and what changed. In a lot of cases, these stories are like two different people that are combined into one, right? And that is just really because it's already a 370-page book or something. It's like, But in the case of Ethan and George, the two Nazis, those are two different characters that were actually one person. And the reason that I did that was because the guy who it's based on, I saw him struggling with the reality of having two close friends of color and the outside influences that were causing him or urging him to be a neo-Nazi skinhead, and like, for instance, that scene where we're having band practice and George tells Ethan to get rid of these, I don't know if he uses the word nigger or what, but get rid of these guys, and then you can join the Aryan Brotherhood. The Niglets, I think I said. Like, that really happened, but it was like an outside Nazi saying that to my friend, and we were right there. Like, the experience is the same for me. Where I'm like, did this guy just say to get rid of his friends? Like,
I'm right here.
Join you. So, and I saw after that experience him really like struggling Even in my selfish 13-year-old brain, I could be empathetic to like, oh man, this guy's got a different struggle, you know?
Yeah.
Because how can you have niggers go back to Africa spray painted on your wall and then be in a room where your two black friends are hanging out? You know, it's like, it doesn't make sense.
Right.
And they
Yeah.
need, like, extreme racists are always like trying to figure out how to make all this stuff make sense, right? So I have empathy for his struggle, but I felt like he would be less empathetic if he was also the guy who is beating people up. And you know what I'm saying? Like,
Right.
we need
Yeah.
to we need to have
Yeah. No.
somebody that we
Yes.
can just like comfortably hate, you know?
Sure. Well, yeah, and an actual antagonist, like within a fictional story, like I feel like, especially now within popular culture, people gravitate
Mm-hmm.
towards anti-heroes, and having somebody who's like, that guy's a piece of shit, full stop,
Yeah. But then even
does help a
him,
narrative.
George, the older brother, he's, you know, a bit of a mustache twirling villain, but you get a little bit of insight to why he became a Nazi, because there's the scene where he like tries to talk to Ty's older sister. And it's made clear that he years ago had a crush on her, and that rejection like is still simmering, you know?
I think that's probably the biggest theme
Mm-hmm.
of the book. Who is going to accept me? You know, where is my group? And watching those two neo-Nazi characters struggle with who's going to accept them, and also seeing, you know, the character of James going through that same thing. I think is one of the reasons why the book has such impact. Even though, you know, you can see one of them and be like, man, that guy's, I mean, that cognitive dissonance though, of being like, well, how is he hanging out with these guys? And I never questioned
Mm-hmm.
it either as being unreal, because I grew up in a really, really small
Mm-hmm.
town, and we had one black kid that went to my high school. So the book looked very much like, you know, the small town in Indiana that I grew up in, and those weird decisions of like the hardcore racists having to try and balance the scales of what is acceptable or not acceptable for them while being around people that they hate or they supposedly hate.
Thank
Like,
you.
you captured it well.
Yeah, and again, it's like that wasn't made up. The that having a crush on this woman of color as a Nazi, like that wasn't made up either. You know, like that actually was
Yeah.
my friend's story too. You know, so it's like, you know,
Yeah.
I didn't have the guts then to be like, dude, I'm black. Your other best friend from high school, I mean from preschool, is a person of color. You have a crush on this Mexican girl. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, like
You're not who you're
why do you
saying you
have a
are.
swastika on the flag on the wall? Like, what is, you know, it doesn't make sense. And, you know, it's like trying to fit in with something that, you know. So all that to say is that I kind of went in with each character separately and said, okay, who is this person? What do they want? Right. Um, and what's stopping them from getting it? You know, and that's kind of like basic storytelling, I think. But it's also true to life, you
Yeah.
know? So it's like, I understood that like Ty just wants to be in a band. He just wants to be on stage. Like that is his goal. That is his dream. And, you know, here are all the things getting in the way of that, you know? So once I understand that, then I can kind of write the true moments. I can get rid of pieces of the story that are irrelevant to that want, and I can just focus on the pieces of that I know about him that are relevant to that want, you know? So I can have the running gag about
Yeah.
Fishbone and the Chili Peppers, and him going to see Fishbone and whatever, because it's like, you know, it's a story that he told, and, you know,
Yeah.
So putting it in, 3 or 4 times throughout the book, it's kind of like, of course, that's the story he's going to tell. Like, look at where we live. The fact that he left town to go to a show
Right.
is like major news.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, all of that stuff. It's so weird because like it's in California, and I grew up like literally in the middle of a cornfield, basically. And the fact that I even found out about Bad Brains, I still have no idea how that happened in the small town that I grew up in. But that's another aspect of you were talking about the external struggles of the Nazi characters and their internal struggles, and my perception of what punk was and is changed so much over the course of the years, like yours has. And the parts in your book where you talk about white bands writing songs where they are ironically talking about racism or saying things that don't sound like, that was one of the points where I was like, shit, this feels so accurate to the place that I grew up in, where further into my 20s than that I'm proud of, like thinking of things that are ironic. And I actually had a friend named Liz Suburbia one time who she put a zine out where I talked about this specific thing. And I was so happy to see your book talk about the ways that those, quote unquote, ironic songs by punk bands are not helpful.
Well, you're going to love my new book, because I have an entire chapter dedicated to that. And just this idea of there's the ironic punk songs that are like using speaking from the perspective of a racist to show how dumb it is, right? I think like the Stiff Little Fingers song is like a really great example, because if you don't know anything about the Stiff Little Fingers, you would just think they were a Nazi band based on that song, right? You don't know that they're Irish, so them as an American, there's part of the song is them insulting Irish people. Are they Irish or Scottish?
I think Irish. You mentioned it in the book.
So don't people don't yell at me. Okay, it's one of those two. I'm an ignorant American.
Yeah.
But it goes to my point, right? They are insulting themselves using a racial slur for themselves. But as ignorant Americans, we just hear like somebody who like with an English accent or something, and you would just think that they were a racist band, right? So the irony goes over our head, Black Flag's White Minority, like that's like a much more clever, not more clever, more popular one. And it's a song that has confused people for generations, right? So there's that, but then there's also the allied N-word, right? And you have bands like Dead Kennedys who are doing the same kind of thing. Christian Death. It's like, what are you guys talking about? It's not helpful, and it doesn't age well. And, and going to, and not discounting the elephant in the room, Guilty of Being White by Minor Threat. It's like, I know you guys had the best intentions. I know that you were talking about racism from the perspective that you could understand it, and the way that you can see it.
Yes.
But it was a failure. It didn't work,
Right. And that's as I grew up and aged into those ideas about how can I talk about these things. I like making fun of stupid racists and trying to figure out how to do it. Like seeing your book talk about it. Honestly, there was a part that I saw myself in the past and realized that I didn't like how I would have talked about those things, which was one of the reasons why I think the book had some of the big impact it had on me. Not only because I consider myself, it's so weird, I would never call myself a punk. I was just about to be like, because I'm a punk, and then I was like, you can't call yourself that, and that makes me wonder more about why I wouldn't want to call myself that. Anyway, that's a different show. I was glad you covered that stuff though, and in a way that obviously fit in with your narrative, and I feel like touched on a really important subject, because doing damage in a situation, especially when you're trying to be helpful and inclusive, is awful. So I was happy to see that. Can you talk about your next book? I am excited. What's it going to be?
I should say ahead of that, I co-edited an anthology coming out in October called Black Punk Now, and it's an anthology of Black punk writers and comics creators. That's coming out in Soft Skull. It'll be out October 31st. So that's like right up on our heels. The book that I'm I haven't signed the deal yet, but it's, offers made and everything, it's another memoir. It's prose, but with illustrations. So it's hybrid, it feels kind of like a comic, but there's a lot of prose. And it's tackling my Afro-Punk story, starting like literally right when the high desert ends. Like the first chapter is me on the road with my mom, moving to New York. And it goes through me learning all of my like ethics and morals and values and the economics of punk, like all of that stuff. And then also dealing with all the things that the self-hate and all the things that led me to want to make the Afro-Punk documentary in my early 20s, and then building a Black alternative community, and quite frankly letting capitalism seep in, and the ways that I sold out and eventually left the company. Like I was almost pushed out. Like there was no room for punk ethics or morals when in a corporation. So it's a bit of a capitalist cautionary tale. There's also like a rewarding end to that story, because of the underground's reaction. So it's that journey of like the mainstream gobbling up the underground and the underground reacting.
Well, I'm insanely looking forward to that. That sounds awesome. And the Soft Skull anthology, that's gonna be cool too. Writing your graphic novel, because I write comics and prose, so I love the idea of switching back and forth, because I try to do that a lot. What was it like? Did you write a full script for the graphic novel? I'm also super interested. I wish I could talk to you a lot longer. Did you write full script, and how were you focusing on making characters sound other than yourself? Since you're writing a memoir where you're one of the main characters, the process of being like, this sounds too much like me, or did you go through that, like speaking dialogue out loud to try and dial it in?
So I did write a script, like traditional script software script. I didn't confine myself to 90 pages or anything like that. I just let it be as long as it needed to be. So I didn't know how long the book would be until I kind of like quote unquote locked the script, and then I thumbnailed the book based on the script, and I was like, oh, this is like 350 some odd pages, like better get started. Interestingly, maybe none of the narration was in the script. So I wrote the whole thing, drew the whole thing, and then was like, I got notes like, I don't know where I am, I don't know when I am, so I started with like meanwhiles and next, later that day or whatever. And then I started having this need to, again, it's my partner. She was saying from the beginning that it needs to have an adult voice, and it just reads like a teen drama. And I have my own process, and I think coming from film, I thought narration was lazy, and I've also read no shortage of graphic novels that rely too heavily on narration, and they're just telling us stuff, and then the drawings are really like kind of like secondary. So I really, I kind of tell myself like I would do it this way again, because everyone tells me that the drawings are so expressive that they could even read it. They could just look at pictures and get the story. And that is, that plays right into my filmmaking like background, right? So
Yeah.
adding the narration really like amplified things, and I was able to pick and choose where I spoke up as opposed to like doing it throughout, and having like the dialogue is as important. And I know that if I would have put it in before, it would just been super wordy. And this way I was able to kind of just like come in with a 1-2 punch and then leave,
So did that lead to a re-edit of the entire book to put those narration boxes in?
Um, it led to like me changing some box
Yeah.
sizes. There are a couple pages where I would have laid it out differently had I had like I can think in particular, like there's a page in New York where I'm talking about Tompkins Square Park, and like the narration like bleeds into the street, and it's really taking over the cell. And I wouldn't have done it that way if I hadn't already drawn. I mean, I did redraw some things. I did make some boxes smaller. I did like, but for the most part, it was fine. There was. I'm not saying that much, and there's places for me to make the drawing smaller,
Yeah.
make the boxes whatever. Like it worked out fine.
The two of the things, I even cited them in my notes that I remembered and stuck out to me, was the apology to your mom, which was in one of your narration boxes. You talking about not speaking up to fit in and not get your ass beat. That was in a narration box. My point being, they fit in to the story very well.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely like, thank you. I mean, it definitely didn't feel like a afterthought, so it just goes to show that, like, for me, that it was kind of meant to be there the whole time. I just have had my own process, which, it's like I always do things the hard way. I mean, you look at the drawings, it's like they didn't have to be as detailed there as they are. It's just like I just made things hard for myself.
Yeah, I understand. I totally understand.
Yeah. And then to answer your question about the characters' voices, I'm sure I know that at certain points I was like, this, like, all of these people sound the same or whatever, and that was early on. I think the more that I understood who they were, the easier it was for me to get into their bodies, because with memoir, again, it's like these are memories. So, and it's dialogue, very few of us can remember dialogue, can remember like that one thing that one person said that like really hurt you or something, but you can't remember every conversation, So it was definitely like, okay, who is Sin, like who is that? Who is Cynthia Sanders? And for me, like, I didn't know that girl very well. I was scared of her. Like, she was in 8th grade and had already been in rehab, like she was really intimidating, she was, but I also remember her being like really loud and being like, it's like, we know who this girl is, like we've met this person before. So embodying that character, and allowing her to, cover her vulnerabilities with like, anger, drugs, sex, like, but then also having like little moments of wanting to be loved. And, like, it's just understanding what is her want, and then speaking from that place. And that she had much different wants than I did, so we're not going to be saying the same things.
I think it all comes across really well, and that the power of the like first person narration of a memoir, those narration blocks, I do think you balance them, because I've read those graphic novels too, where it's like, you don't have to tell me that you're doing this thing. I see the picture, the thing is happening, it's there. But yours are always spare enough, or they do bring in the voice that's needed to give maybe more context. I think it works really well.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I just made a rule for myself that like very little of the narration is going to be anything that 13-year-old James would say or think.
Yeah.
So there are a couple moments where I let it go, where like, and it's still like like I'm thinking of this one part where like there's the character Derek who's like he's just the idiot jock who like keeps picking on me and stuff, right? And I had this like him like looking at the drawing is him like trying to give like a hard face or something, you know? And I wrote like, this is the face Josh makes when he's trying to be hard or when he's trying to be intimidating. What a dick, you know? Right. And it's like, yeah, both me at 13 and me now think that he's a dick, you know? But for the most part, you know, I tried to be insightful and not just like, you know, I kind of tried to leave the comedy to the kids and be more insightful in my adult narration.
Yeah. Well, I love your book. I'm super pumped to read those other two. I love your documentary, which I got to watch last night. Where should people go to spoonersnofun.com and check out your stuff? Will you have announcements for the books and everything there?
Yeah. I'm planning to make the Black Punk Now page for my website this week, so that should be up soon. It's on the Soft Skull website if anybody wants to pre-order it. And the other one I'll announce. It'll probably be a year. I'm still like fiddling with the name and all the stuff, so the book's not going to come out for a couple years, so it takes a while to. I've written like a third of it, so it's a
slow process to put books out for a lot, and in graphic novels especially, because it's a ton of work.
Yeah, that's part of why I'm doing prose is just because I don't want to spend 5 years on this story, like got other stories to tell.
I get it. Last thing I'll ask you before we head out, what's one of the best punk shows you've ever seen?
Oh, wow. Can I tell you two?
Heck yeah.
Just because I recently, maybe less than 2 years ago, there's a band from Australia called Emil and the Sniffers.
Oh, I was going to say, if you say the Stiff Richards, that's the album I bought right before I bought your book.
Oh, wow. No. Emil and the Sniffers, I saw them at the Terragram Ballroom. It's probably like a 500 cap. And it was packed. It was like, they are so good, so much fun. They have so many catchy songs. And it felt to me when I see videos of Los Angeles punk in 1982, where 7 people are stage diving at the same time.
Yeah.
Like that's what was happening. The entire room was a pit, like if you know anything about Los Angeles punk from the 80s, it was always just like, how do they have a 400 person circle pit?
This is crazy.
Yeah. And that's what was happening. It was amazing. I'm curious because I've seen them recently. I saw them a few months ago and they were in like a 1,000 cap room. So they're getting bigger. Yeah. And it didn't have the same energy because now there's the barrier between the wall and, so people couldn't stage dive as much. They might be one of those bands that as they get bigger, they lose something. Yeah. And I saw them in their sweet spot, but nonetheless, they're a great band. So that was really good. And then, the other one that comes to mind was probably in 2005 or something like that. It was an Afro-Punk show where we had this band called DeFe, D-F-E. You can still find some of their videos online, but they're from France. They're all Caribbean and African immigrants, and they're playing this very heavy chugga chugga metal with 2 vocalists, one that's one's a woman and one's a guy, and they're both the girl had a very kind of Cookie Monster vocal, and somebody's playing this one stringed kind of African instrument, and it's the music itself is bananas, but that room, it was in this place that's 150 people, 200 people. We used to do these parties in the Delancey in New York, and a little basement venue, and the whole place was one organism, just the whole room. there's no mosh pit because it's just tight and everybody is just like swaying, like, banging that, like the people in the front are like, their shins are bleeding because they're on, like the stage is so low.
Right.
And it's just like the whole room is just one organism. And I've had a couple of those kind of experiences in my life. Early 90s, seeing Frail and Chokehold in a barn in Allentown, Pennsylvania or something. It's like same thing where it's just like there's no individual left. The whole room is just one organism and just swaying to that locomotive guitar, It
feels amazing.
That's, for me, it's like, as someone who's never been in a band of note, I've always been I've always been in the audience,
Yeah.
And now as a grown up, I think like I'm way more interested in the audience.
Yeah.
Like when I see band photos, I'm looking at who's in the front row. I love that there's just this nonstop ability to get photos of shows, and there's a lot of photographers who take pictures of the audience. Like that's the community. That's why we're there. I always try to remind people that like we all love the music. That's why we come. Let me say that again. Like we all love the music, but the band is the excuse for us as a community to get together. Right. Yeah. I mean, that's what like punk is to me. Right. Like if I go see, I don't know, like, if I go to the Hollywood Bowl and see like, a mainstream act, if I go see ELO or something, like I'm not there to make friends, I'm there to hear this band, and I'm not going to walk out of there with any new buddies,
Yeah.
But like punk and hardcore shows, like I was there to be part of a community, I was there to like sell zines. I was there to like argue with people over like what brand of veganism we should be having. Like I was there to make friends and meet girls, and like it's a community, and the band is just an excuse for us to meet at this place.
Right.
So when, I have these experiences, you ask this question and I'm like really interested in what the audience is doing, like the music is why we're doing it.
Yep.
But the reason that I felt high in those moments is because it was not about me or the band. It was about this community, like working. It's like an ecosystem,
Yeah. Feeling connected to a thing that you can't see.
Mm-hmm.
Like it exists, obviously, in the sound waves, and the band's doing this thing where they're like playing us with the music. The music is playing the audience, but feeling that connection to a thing that doesn't, like, you can't really grab it and it's going to go away.
Yeah.
It can't last forever.
Maybe, I've always had a trouble with this word. But maybe that is what spirituality is, It's like everyone in that room has got the Holy Ghost,
That was my chat with James Spooner, creator of the graphic novel The High Desert, available now. Make sure you go grab it, read it, listen to some punk music. You can go to spoonersnofun.com to check out all of his work. You can pre-order that Soft Skull Press anthology that he co-edited with Chris L. Terry called Black Punk Now, so go to softskull.com. You can find it there. And yeah, let me know what you thought of the show. Shoot me an email. I have a contact page on my website at austinrwilson.com. Share the show. Tell other writers about it. Tell other people. Anyone. Doesn't have to be a writer. I want to make sure everybody who maybe could get something out of it hears it. I've already got a couple other interviews scheduled coming up next month, so watch out for those. Go do some writing, have fun, and tell a story.